Princess Anne stood beside Kate when Camilla's son crossed a boundary. Royal guards saw everything. The grand halls of the royal residence were unusually quiet that afternoon. Soft sunlight poured through tall, arched windows, casting warm, golden light across the polished floors and intricate tapestries. Every corner of the room whispered history, echoing centuries of tradition and the careful steps of generations of royals. Despite the calm and beauty of the surroundings, there was an underlying tension in the air that only those familiar with the royal family could notice. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it lingered like a shadow behind the serene walls. Princess Anne, known for her unwavering poise and sharp sense of awareness, stood near one side of the room, her posture perfect, her eyes observing quietly. She had been attending gatherings in royal residences her entire life, and her instincts told her that today was different. She could sense that something might happen, a small ripple in the careful order of the household that could unsettle the delicate balance of family dynamics. But she was ready. Standing next to her, dressed in a soft, elegant outfit, was Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge. Kate's calm demeanor complemented Anne's presence. While Anne's gaze was precise and vigilant, Kate's warmth and grace added a gentle balance to the atmosphere. Together, they formed a quiet wall of strength, unspoken yet undeniable, that spoke volumes about respect, composure, and authority. The event that had brought them together was not one for public attention, but for private family matters. A small gathering had been arranged to honor a personal celebration, an afternoon tea that included only close family members and trusted aides. While the occasion might have seemed ordinary to an outsider inside the residence, it carried the weight of tradition and careful etiquette. Every movement, every word spoken was measured and meaningful. In such spaces, even the smallest gestures could be interpreted in multiple ways, and every attendee was aware of their place and role. Among those present was Camilla's son, a young man navigating the complex web of royal family life. He was aware of the expectations surrounding him, yet he had a tendency to act with impulsive enthusiasm, sometimes forgetting the invisible rules that govern the household. As he moved through the room, there was a subtle air of nervous energy around him, as if he were aware that he was being watched, even when no one directly addressed him. His eyes darted between the guests, searching for approval, recognition, or perhaps just a hint that he was doing something right. The royal guard assigned to this wing of the residence was stationed discreetly, almost blending into the surroundings. He was trained to notice every detail, from the way someone carried themselves to the slightest movement that might signal discomfort, mischief, or breach of protocol. While his presence was meant to be unobtrusive, it carried a quiet weight. The guard understood that in the royal household, vigilance was a necessity, not a choice. He watched Princess Anne and Kate, recognizing the subtle signals in their body language. The way Anne's gaze swept the room like a precise instrument, and how Kate's posture radiated calm confidence. He knew that their presence alone could prevent minor disruptions from escalating into incidents that might tarnish the family's image. As the guests engaged in polite conversation, there was a soft murmur of voices blending with the occasional clink of fine china and the subtle rustling of fabric. The air smelled faintly of freshly brewed tea, delicate pastries, and polished wood. Every detail seemed ordinary, yet every detail was significant. Each person knew their role, yet each also felt the tension that came with being part of such a structured environment. Princess Anne's eyes remained alert, scanning the room for anything that might break the fragile order. She did not speak unnecessarily. Her presence alone communicated authority, experience, and readiness. Kate, on the other hand, interacted with the younger family members with gentle attention. She listened carefully, her expressions warm and encouraging, making those around her feel at ease while still maintaining a quiet dignity. Her approach was different from Anne's. It was soft and subtle, yet equally powerful. In that room, the combination of Anne's vigilance and Kate's calm composure created a balance that kept everyone aligned with the unspoken rules. Their partnership in observation was almost seamless. While one read the room with precision, the other offered reassurance and support, creating an atmosphere where even subtle disruptions could be noticed before they grew into problems. Camilla's son moved closer to a restricted area, his curiosity outweighing his caution. He did not intend any disrespect, But the unspoken rules of royal protocol were clear, and his approach brushed against a boundary that should not have been crossed. At that moment, Princess Anne's instincts kicked in. She subtly shifted her position, moving closer to Kate, forming a quiet but unmistakable signal that something was amiss. It was the kind of silent intervention she had perfected over decades. No words, no loud gestures, just a positioning of herself that conveyed authority and control. Kate, noticing Anne's movement, instinctively understood the message. Her gaze followed Anne's, and she adjusted her posture slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the potential tension. The young man, unaware of the exact reason for the shift, felt a gentle weight in the room, a sense of being observed, measured, and corrected without confrontation. Anne's presence alone communicated the seriousness of the situation. Kate's quiet support reinforced that message, showing unity and calm authority. The royal guard, positioned at a careful distance, observed everything with trained attention. He noted the young man's hesitant steps, the careful movements of the women, and the subtle dynamics that played out like a delicate dance. Every gesture, every glance carried meaning. The guard's role was not to intervene immediately, but to ensure that decorum was maintained, and that any misstep could be quietly corrected. He understood that within the walls of the palace, the smallest actions could have ripple effects, influencing relationships, perceptions, and future interactions. The room itself seemed to respond to the tension. The soft light fell differently on the faces of those present, highlighting expressions that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. The quiet rustle of fabric, the faint scent of tea, and the gentle murmur of conversation all combined to create a scene that was at once serene and charged with subtle energy. In that moment, the ordinary elegance of the royal residence became the stage for an unspoken lesson in composure, observation, and the silent exercise of authority. Princess Anne's presence near Kate was more than physical, it was symbolic. It represented the balance of experience and vigilance, a reminder that even in moments that appeared calm, the responsibility to maintain order never wavered. Kate's response, equally composed, illustrated the modern adaptation of these principles, showing warmth and approachability without compromising authority. Together, they demonstrated that in the royal household, influence often manifested in silence, in posture, and in the unspoken understanding of one's role. As the gathering continued, the young man's curiosity was tempered by the unspoken signals from Anne and Kate. He realized, without any need for direct confrontation, that he had approached a limit he should not cross. The subtle interplay of observation, presence, and gentle authority was enough to guide his behavior, reinforcing the invisible rules that govern the space. The royal guard continued to watch quietly, aware that sometimes the mere presence of those trained in authority could prevent incidents before they occurred. In the midst of all this, the room retained its appearance of calm. Conversations flowed politely, smiles were exchanged, and the tea service continued without interruption. Yet beneath the surface, lessons were being absorbed. The young man learned the value of awareness and restraint. Those around him were reminded of the quiet power of observation and composure. And Anne and Kate, standing side by side, demonstrated through action rather than words that respect for tradition and careful vigilance were essential components of life within the palace walls. By the time the afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows across the room, a sense of equilibrium had been restored. What could have become a tense situation remained contained, thanks to the subtle yet powerful presence of two women who understood the importance of balance, observation, and quiet authority. The young man, while initially unaware of the full significance of the moment, carried with him the lessons of restraint and awareness. And the royal guard, ever vigilant, continued his watch, knowing that in the world of royalty, no gesture, no step, and no glance went unnoticed. Even in a setting defined by elegance, tradition, and ceremonial precision, the human element, the instincts, the gestures, the silent communications, was what truly shaped the atmosphere. Princess Anne and Kate stood as living reminders that authority, composure, and subtle guidance were often more powerful than words. And for those who witnessed it, including the ever-watchful guard, the afternoon became a quiet testament to the careful balance that defined life within the royal household. The young man, Camilla's son, felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness as he glanced around the room. He had always been aware of the expectations placed upon him, but in this quiet gathering, those expectations seemed heavier than ever. The grand walls, lined with portraits of previous generations, reminded him silently that he was part of a long and complex lineage. Every person in the room had a role, every movement mattered, and even the smallest gestures were noticed. He shifted slightly, adjusting his posture, trying to appear calm while internally wrestling with a sense of uncertainty. He had approached an area of the room that was technically off-limits, a subtle space that held ceremonial importance. No one had explicitly told him not to go there. It was more a matter of instinct and training that dictated its boundaries. Yet, as he moved closer, he felt a gentle but unmistakable pressure in the atmosphere. Princess Anne, always vigilant, had subtly stepped closer to Kate, positioning herself so that her presence would be felt even without a word being spoken. Her stance was firm yet calm, a silent statement that the invisible line had been crossed. Kate, noticing Anne's shift, adjusted her own posture, her quiet gaze meeting Anne's with unspoken understanding. The young man froze for a moment, sensing that something was wrong, though he could not yet identify what. He had often been in formal settings, yet this was different. The weight of history, tradition, and expectation pressed down on him in a way that felt almost tangible. The room seemed to hold its breath. The royal guard, stationed discreetly nearby, observed everything with trained precision. He noted the young man's tentative movements, the way his hands hovered slightly as if unsure of what to do next. The guard's eyes flicked to Anne and Kate, recognizing the silent communication between the two women, and then back to the young man, understanding that an intervention, if necessary, would be subtle and measured. Camilla's son attempted to retreat, but not before his curiosity drew him closer to a delicate display on a side table. Fine china, crystal, and polished silver reflected the sunlight, creating a dazzling array of light and shadow across the room. He paused, captivated by the intricate patterns and shimmering surfaces, forgetting for a moment the rules he was meant to follow. That pause, however, was enough for Princess Anne to act, though her action was far from dramatic. She did not speak, nor did she raise her voice. Instead, she shifted slightly, her gaze steady and firm, a quiet reminder that boundaries existed for a reason. Kate's presence beside her added an invisible layer of support, ensuring that the young man would notice the correction without embarrassment or confrontation. The young man's hesitation grew as he realized that he was being observed not just by the women, but by the ever-present eyes of the royal guard. He understood, instinctively, that any misstep could be noted and remembered, even if it was not spoken aloud. The atmosphere was tense, but not in a way that felt hostile. It was a tension born of respect, tradition, and the understanding that some moments in life required composure above all else. Slowly, he began to step back, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he were negotiating his way out of a delicate situation. In that quiet tension, the room revealed its true character. Every detail mattered. The gentle tilt of a head, the placement of a hand, the subtle glance between individuals. Princess Anne's composure was a masterclass in silent authority. She had spent decades navigating the intricacies of royal life, and her instincts were precise and unerring. Her presence conveyed far more than words could, guiding behavior and setting boundaries with elegance and restraint. Kate's approach, soft yet firm, complemented Anne's perfectly. She offered a warmth that reassured those around her, while still signaling that decorum and respect were paramount. As Camilla's son withdrew further from the restricted area, he became aware of the nuances in the room. The soft hum of polite conversation continued around him, yet it felt different now, more intentional, more measured. The words spoken by others seemed almost ceremonial, each sentence a careful step in a dance of etiquette and observation. Even the sound of chairs being adjusted or teacups being placed on saucers carried weight. It was as though the very air had shifted, demanding attention and care. The royal guard remained an unseen presence, watching the situation unfold with trained patience. His eyes followed every motion, every subtle gesture. He understood that the young man's awareness of being observed was just as important as any direct instruction. Sometimes, the mere presence of authority, silent, calm, and watchful, was enough to correct behavior. The guard's role was to maintain safety and ensure that decorum was preserved. but also to allow the social dynamics of the room to guide themselves. He knew that intervention was most effective when it was subtle, almost invisible, allowing those involved to learn from the experience without embarrassment. The young man finally stopped near a corner of the room, his curiosity now tempered by caution. He glanced at Anne and Kate, noticing for the first time the deliberate way they had positioned themselves. There was no anger, no scolding, only a calm and steady presence that demanded respect. He felt a mixture of relief and humility, realizing that he had been guided rather than reprimanded. It was a lesson in observation, awareness, and the power of silent communication, lessons he would carry with him long after this afternoon. Princess Anne and Kate exchanged a brief, subtle look, a silent acknowledgement of the situation's resolution. Their eyes conveyed understanding, support, and approval without a single word being spoken. It was a moment that demonstrated the strength of their partnership. Anne, with her experience and vigilance, and Kate, with her grace and quiet authority. Together, they had managed a potentially tense situation with poise and effectiveness, demonstrating that influence often required no words, only presence and careful guidance. The young man, now aware of the lessons embedded in the encounter, moved away from the delicate displays and joined the other guests more appropriately. He spoke with measured politeness, careful to observe the subtle rules of engagement he had momentarily overlooked. Every word, every gesture was now deliberate, guided by the silent lessons he had just received. The room returned to its calm rhythm, conversations resuming their gentle flow, but the impact of the moment lingered quietly in the background. For the royal guard, the afternoon was a reminder of the nuances of his role. He had witnessed the effectiveness of composed authority, the quiet power of presence, and the importance of observation in maintaining order. In the royal household, lessons were often learned in silence, through gestures, glances, and positioning rather than through words. The young man's response had demonstrated the success of this approach, reinforcing the delicate balance between guidance and independence that defined life within these walls. As the afternoon continued, the sunlight shifted, casting new patterns of light across the room. The young man moved more confidently among the guests, his earlier hesitation replaced with a cautious awareness. He observed the subtle interactions around him, noticing how even minor gestures carried meaning. He began to understand that being part of the royal household was not just about privilege or ceremony. It was about responsibility, mindfulness, and the careful navigation of relationships and expectations. Princess Anne remained poised, her watchful eyes scanning the room, ever vigilant for the next subtle shift in dynamics. Kate continued to offer quiet warmth and assurance, her presence reminding everyone that authority could be exercised with kindness and patience. The young man, now more aware, respected their guidance, understanding that their roles were not just ceremonial but essential for maintaining the balance of tradition and propriety. By the time the afternoon tea drew to a close, a sense of equilibrium had returned to the room. The young man had learned, through subtle correction and observation, the importance of boundaries, awareness, and respect. Princess Anne and Kate had demonstrated without a single raised voice the power of composed authority and the value of standing together in maintaining order. The royal guard, ever present, had ensured that the situation remained under control while allowing those involved to learn and grow from the experience. As guests began to depart, the atmosphere remained calm and respectful, a testament to the careful orchestration of presence, observation, and subtle guidance. The young man, though initially unaware of the full significance of the moment, had absorbed lessons that would guide him in future interactions. Princess Anne and Kate, through their composed intervention, had not only prevented a breach of protocol, but had also provided a living example of leadership, poise, and silent influence. In the quiet aftermath, the room seemed to breathe again, the tension dissipating like a passing storm. The soft sounds of conversation, the gentle clink of teacups, and the faint rustle of fabric returned to normal, but the lessons of the afternoon remained. The young man's awareness had deepened, the guidance of Anne and Kate had been reinforced, and the royal guard's vigilance had ensured that tradition, decorum, and respect had all been preserved. It was a quiet triumph, a subtle reminder that in the world of royalty, every moment held significance and every gesture carried weight. The royal guard remained quietly attentive, his eyes sweeping the room with unwavering focus. He had spent years in service, trained to notice the smallest shifts in body language, the slightest tension in a voice, or the subtlest expression on a face. To him, the afternoon was not merely an ordinary gathering. It was an intricate performance of tradition, etiquette, and family dynamics. Every gesture and movement mattered. He knew that in royal residences, decorum was not simply expected. It was enforced, silently but effectively, by those who understood its importance. From his discreet position near a polished wooden column, the guard had witnessed the young man's initial misstep, his hesitant retreat, and the subtle yet powerful presence of Princess Anne and Kate. What struck him most was the precision with which the two women had guided the situation. There had been no raised voices, no admonishment, no need for a formal reprimand. Anne's posture, firm but composed, and Kate's quiet awareness had been enough to redirect the young man's actions without confrontation. The guard appreciated the lesson in subtle authority. It was something he would later reflect on in his own professional conduct. As the young man moved away from the restricted area, his curiosity still evident in his eyes, the guard observed how he tried to regain composure. He adjusted his shoulders, straightened his posture, and attempted to blend back into the group with polite conversation. Yet the guard noticed something deeper, an awareness beginning to emerge. The young man was processing the lesson, slowly understanding the importance of boundaries, respect, and observation. This was more than a matter of etiquette. It was a test of character, and the guard recognized that such moments were often more meaningful than public ceremonies or formal instructions. Princess Anne, standing with quiet authority, did not let her vigilance lapse. She had seen such moments before, instances where the weight of privilege and familiarity could tempt young family members to push limits. Her experience had taught her that subtle guidance, when delivered with precision, could prevent misunderstandings and maintain harmony. She observed the young man carefully, noting the changes in his demeanor and the careful way he now navigated the room. Anne's instincts were sharp, honed over decades of navigating the complexities of royal life, and she knew that her presence alone could shape behavior without a single word spoken. Kate, always attuned to the emotional undercurrents in a room, remained a quiet complement to Anne's authority. Her warm expression, gentle posture, and calm attention provided reassurance to those around her. She understood that in the tense world of royalty, authority needed to be balanced with empathy. The young man could sense her calm energy, even if he could not fully articulate it. Kate's presence made the correction less intimidating, transforming what could have been an embarrassing moment into a subtle, instructive experience. Together, Anne and Kate created an environment where lessons were learned gracefully, and respect was maintained without overt confrontation. The royal guard, while observing, also noted the small details that spoke volumes about the dynamics in the room. The young man's hands, which had initially fidgeted, were now clasped more deliberately. His eyes, once darting nervously, were beginning to settle on appropriate points of focus. His movements were more measured, reflecting an emerging awareness of the invisible rules that governed the space. The guard understood that this was the essence of his role as well, not just to enforce rules directly, but to ensure that those within the palace could learn to navigate them with dignity. As the afternoon progressed, the conversations around the room continued, polite and measured, yet carrying an undercurrent of attentiveness. Every guest was aware of the subtle corrections that had occurred. Some may not have noticed consciously, but the energy in the room had shifted. The young man, now more self-aware, spoke with care, choosing his words thoughtfully and observing the subtle cues from those around him. The guard, ever watchful, recognized that these small behavioral adjustments were as significant as any formal instruction. They were the silent lessons of royal life, absorbed through observation and guided presence. The young man paused near the center of the room, taking a moment to reflect internally. Though the afternoon tea continued around him, he felt a quiet sense of accountability. He understood that even in private gatherings, the eyes of authority were present, and that maintaining respect and composure was not optional but essential. This realization was profound for him. He was learning, perhaps for the first time, that boundaries were not arbitrary restrictions. They were essential markers of respect, tradition, and family harmony. Princess Anne's gaze occasionally flicked toward him, a subtle check on his progress. Her eyes were steady and calm, yet they carried the weight of experience. She had learned long ago that young family members often needed guidance without humiliation, and she had perfected the art of providing it silently. By positioning herself strategically and allowing Kate to complement her presence, she created a protective framework around the young man, guiding him toward understanding while preserving his dignity. Kate, observing Anne's precise intervention, continued her quiet support. She occasionally nodded slightly or offered a gentle smile, gestures so understated that they could easily go unnoticed by anyone not paying close attention. Yet these gestures reinforced the lesson. They communicated approval, reassurance, and encouragement, reminding the young man that he was being guided, not punished. Kate's approach highlighted the balance between authority and empathy, showing that leadership could be both firm and compassionate. The young man's thoughts began to shift from initial curiosity and hesitation to reflection. He noticed how the room responded to Anne and Kate's presence. Conversations slowed slightly as the subtle tension of the lesson settled into the atmosphere. Gestures that might have once seemed insignificant now carried meaning. Every movement, glance, and posture held a story of awareness, respect, and adaptation. The young man was absorbing these lessons not through words, but through observation, learning to navigate the intricate world of royal life through the silent guidance of those who understood it best. Meanwhile, the royal guard continued his careful observation, noting the effectiveness of Anne and Kate's intervention. He recognized the importance of patience in such situations. Immediate confrontation was rarely necessary. The presence of composed authority often spoke louder than words. The guard also understood the long-term impact of such moments. Lessons learned in private, guided by subtle influence, were more likely to endure than public reprimands or formal instructions. The young man's response, hesitation replaced by thoughtful composure, was evidence of this truth. Throughout the room, the interplay of observation, authority, and empathy created an almost tangible rhythm. Guests moved carefully, conversations maintained a respectful tone, and gestures were measured. It was as if the atmosphere itself had shifted, influenced by the silent authority of Anne and Kate and the watchful presence of the guard. The young man, now fully aware of the invisible boundaries he had approached, adjusted his behavior accordingly, moving with careful consideration and observing the unspoken rules that governed the space. As the afternoon progressed, the young man began to engage more confidently with the other guests, speaking politely and participating in the tea service with appropriate decorum. He was learning not just about rules, but about relationships, respect, and the subtle dynamics that defined life in the royal household. The guard, observing from his discreet position, took note of these improvements. It was a quiet but meaningful success, demonstrating the power of subtle guidance and composed authority in shaping behavior without the need for direct confrontation. Princess Anne and Kate continued their roles, vigilant yet unobtrusive. Their presence was a living example of leadership, composure, and the balance of authority with empathy. They understood that lessons were often most effective when experienced rather than explained. The young man, absorbing these lessons through observation and experience, was internalizing principles that would serve him well in the future. He was learning about restraint, respect, and the subtle power of presence, all without a single harsh word being spoken. By the end of the afternoon, the young man had navigated the gathering successfully. His initial misstep transformed into a valuable learning experience. Princess Anne's steady vigilance and Kate's quiet guidance had provided him with a model of respectful authority and thoughtful observation. The royal guard, ever attentive, had ensured that the situation remained safe and controlled, allowing the lessons to unfold naturally. The room, once charged with tension, now radiated calm and balance, a testament to the effectiveness of composed, subtle intervention. In the quiet aftermath, the young man reflected on the events of the afternoon. He realized that boundaries were not merely rules to follow, but markers of respect and responsibility. He understood that authority could be expressed without anger or reprimand, and that guidance could come through presence, observation, and subtle signals. Princess Anne and Kate had shown him that leadership was not always loud or direct. It could be measured, composed, and quietly powerful. The royal guard, observing the scene with satisfaction, recognized the success of the afternoon. The young man had learned through experience, Anne and Kate had demonstrated leadership, and the household's traditions had been upheld. It was a quiet, unspoken triumph, one that highlighted the intricate interplay of authority, respect, and empathy within the royal family. Every gesture, glance, and posture had contributed to the outcome, reinforcing the delicate balance required to maintain harmony in such a complex environment. By the time the last teacup was returned to the tray and the soft murmur of conversation faded, a sense of equilibrium had settled over the room. The young man, now more self-aware and composed, had absorbed lessons that would guide him in future interactions. Princess Anne and Kate, standing side by side, had quietly ensured that decorum and respect were preserved, demonstrating the power of subtle influence and careful guidance. The royal guard, ever vigilant, had completed his silent duty, knowing that the afternoon had been a success in every sense. The room, once tense and uncertain, now hummed with calm, polite energy. Lessons had been learned, boundaries respected, and the delicate balance of tradition and authority maintained. In the world of royalty, where every gesture carries meaning, the afternoon had served as a perfect example of how presence, observation, and composed guidance could shape behavior, teach respect, and preserve harmony. The tension of the afternoon had finally eased, but the lessons it carried lingered quietly in the minds of those present. Camilla's son, now aware of the boundaries he had approached earlier, walked slowly through the room, trying to understand the subtle signals he had received. His initial curiosity and impulsive nature had been tempered by a newfound respect for the rules and for the people who maintained them. He had begun the afternoon with a casual confidence, assuming that small deviations from protocol would go unnoticed. By now, however, he realized that the world he had entered demanded not only respect, but awareness, patience, and humility. He paused near a window, gazing at the sprawling gardens outside. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting moving patterns on the floor that seemed to mirror his own thoughts, shifting, uncertain, yet slowly finding clarity. The young man reflected on the subtle guidance he had received from Princess Anne and Kate. Their methods were so quiet, so unobtrusive, that at first he had not even realized he was being corrected. Yet now, looking back, he understood that every glance, every shift in posture, and every silent cue had carried meaning. The experience had been a lesson in observation, self-awareness, and the importance of respecting boundaries without needing explicit instruction. Princess Anne remained poised near the center of the room, her eyes scanning the gathering with a calm, watchful attention. She had seen the young man pause by the window and recognized the moment as an opportunity for reflection. Rather than approaching him directly, she allowed the space for him to process the experience. Anne had long understood that sometimes the most effective guidance came through silent presence. By simply standing where she could be seen, her composed demeanor serving as a model, she reminded him that authority could be firm, gentle, and graceful all at once. Kate, positioned nearby, offered a quiet support that was almost invisible in its subtlety. Her posture was relaxed, her expression warm, but her attention never wavered. She understood that the young man needed encouragement as much as correction. By offering reassurance through her calm presence, she reinforced Anne's guidance without drawing attention to herself. Together, Anne and Kate demonstrated a balance of authority and empathy, showing that lessons could be absorbed without embarrassment or confrontation. The royal guard, stationed discreetly near the corner of the room, continued to observe. He noted the young man's reflective pause by the window, his gradual adjustment to the atmosphere, and the subtle communication between Anne and Kate. For the guard, this was a demonstration of the quiet power of composed authority. He had seen many formal gatherings in his years of service, but moments like this, where guidance, observation, and empathy combined to shape behavior, were particularly meaningful. The young man's recognition of the boundaries and his willingness to adjust his actions reinforced the effectiveness of subtle, patient leadership. The young man turned from the window and began to move back toward the group of guests. This time his steps were more measured, his gestures more deliberate, and his posture reflected a newfound awareness. He greeted the other attendees with polite nods and soft smiles, observing the social cues with greater care than before. Even small interactions, such as taking tea or responding to conversation, were now handled with thoughtfulness. It was as if the earlier tension had awakened a sense of mindfulness within him, a quiet understanding of the world he had entered and the behavior it required. As he moved among the guests, he caught the eye of Princess Anne. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that she had noticed his improvement. It was not a reward in the traditional sense, but a subtle recognition of growth. Kate, noticing the exchange, mirrored the gesture with a gentle, reassuring smile. These small signals reinforced the lesson without words, demonstrating that observation, patience, and presence could communicate more than direct instruction ever could. The young man felt a quiet sense of pride, tempered with humility, as he realized the importance of these nonverbal forms of guidance. The afternoon continued with a quiet elegance. Guests engaged in polite conversation, the soft clinking of china punctuating moments of laughter or thoughtful discussion. The young man now moved confidently within the space, fully aware of the invisible lines that governed his behavior. He listened attentively, spoke carefully, and responded to cues from others with respect and understanding. Each interaction was a chance to practice what he had learned, reinforcing the subtle lessons from earlier in the day. Princess Anne observed all of this with satisfaction. Her method had been simple yet effective: silent guidance, careful positioning, and watchful attention. By allowing the young man space to reflect and adjust, she had achieved more than a direct correction could have accomplished. She understood that real growth often came from internal recognition rather than external reprimand. Kate's quiet support amplified the effect, offering reassurance that reinforced Anne's authority without diminishing the young man's confidence. Together, they had created an environment where learning could occur naturally, gracefully, and effectively. The royal guard, ever vigilant, made mental notes of the young man's improved composure. He understood the importance of these observations, not just for protocol, but for the continued harmony of the household. The subtle lessons absorbed that afternoon would influence future behavior and interactions. Even small changes in posture, tone, or attentiveness could prevent future missteps, reinforcing the delicate balance of respect, authority, and decorum within the royal residence. As the young man approached a small table laden with pastries and tea, he noticed how carefully the staff attended to their duties. Every movement, every gesture was performed with precision and respect. He realized that the standards applied to him were mirrored in the work of those around him. Respect, attentiveness, and awareness were not limited to interactions with family members. They extended to everyone within the household. This realization deepened his understanding of the environment and the responsibilities it required. He picked up a teacup, holding it with deliberate care, and joined a quiet conversation with another guest. His voice was calm, measured, and polite, reflecting the lessons he had absorbed. The earlier tension had transformed into a moment of personal growth. He understood that authority could guide without dominating, that boundaries existed to preserve respect and harmony, and that silent lessons could be more powerful than spoken ones. The room, once charged with subtle tension, now radiated calm and order. The young man's reflection and behavior had contributed to this equilibrium. Guests moved with ease, conversations flowed naturally, and the atmosphere was both elegant and serene. Princess Anne and Kate continued to observe quietly, their presence a reminder that even in seemingly ordinary moments, the values of respect, composure, and awareness were always present. The afternoon drew toward its conclusion, the soft light from the windows slowly shifting as the sun began its descent. Camilla's son had not only regained composure, but had also internalized the importance of observation and awareness. He understood that in a setting such as this, every action mattered, and every interaction carried significance. His earlier misstep had become a turning point, a quiet lesson in the balance between curiosity, respect, and understanding. Princess Anne allowed herself a subtle, satisfied smile. The afternoon had been a quiet success, demonstrating the effectiveness of composed authority and patient guidance. Kate's gentle presence complemented Anne's strength, providing reassurance and support that ensured the young man's growth without embarrassment. Together, they had maintained decorum, taught important lessons, and reinforced the values that guided life within the royal household. The royal guard, observing the final interactions, recognized the harmony that had been restored. The young man moved confidently, guests engaged respectfully, and the atmosphere remained composed and elegant. It was a testament to the power of subtle guidance, the influence of silent authority, and the effectiveness of empathy combined with vigilance. The afternoon had been a lesson in leadership, observation, and personal growth, and it had been achieved without confrontation, conflict, or drama. As the gathering began to disperse, the young man offered polite thanks to Princess Anne and Kate, acknowledging their guidance in his own quiet way. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of respect and gratitude. Anne nodded gently, her expression calm but approving. Kate returned a warm, reassuring smile, reinforcing the young man's understanding of the lessons he had learned. The royal guard, standing at attention nearby, observed the exchange with quiet satisfaction, noting the positive resolution of what could have become a tense situation. In the final moments of the afternoon, the room retained a sense of calm and order. The young man had internalized the lessons of boundaries, observation, and respect. Princess Anne and Kate had demonstrated the power of composed authority and gentle guidance. The royal guard had ensured that decorum was maintained, while allowing the natural learning process to unfold. Every element of the afternoon had contributed to a deeper understanding of the delicate balance required to navigate life within the royal household. As the last guest departed and the quiet of the residence settled over the halls, the young man lingered for a moment, reflecting on the experience. He realized that respect and awareness were not burdensome rules, but essential tools for navigating a complex world. He understood that authority could be exercised without harshness, that guidance could be subtle and effective, and that personal growth often came from observation and reflection rather than instruction alone. The afternoon, now behind him, had become a defining moment, a quiet but powerful lesson in respect, composure, and awareness. Princess Anne and Kate had provided guidance that was both gentle and firm, and the royal guard had ensured that the environment allowed for learning and reflection. The young man's behavior had improved, his understanding deepened, and the harmony of the gathering had been preserved. It was a success measured not in drama or confrontation, but in growth, awareness, and respect for tradition. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the royal residence. The long afternoon had drawn to a close, yet the lessons of the day lingered quietly in the minds of those who had been present. Camilla's son, now walking through the grand halls with a sense of calm and reflection, carried a mixture of humility and understanding. The earlier tension, which might have caused embarrassment or discomfort, had transformed into a moment of personal growth. He realized that being part of the royal family was not merely about privilege, but about responsibility, respect, and awareness of those around him. The young man thought back to the moment when he had crossed the subtle boundary earlier in the afternoon. At first, he had acted out of curiosity, unaware of the invisible rules governing the space. Now, he understood that the restrictions were not arbitrary. They were markers of tradition, respect, and the delicate balance that allowed the household to function smoothly. Every gesture, every word, and every glance had meaning, and every individual had a role to play in maintaining harmony. He had learned that day that awareness and restraint were just as important as enthusiasm and confidence. Princess Anne, standing near one of the tall windows, observed the young man with quiet satisfaction. Her posture remained composed, her gaze calm and steady, yet there was a subtle warmth in her eyes. She had guided him without words, relying on presence and position to communicate authority. Through decades of experience, she understood that lessons learned quietly, with dignity intact, were far more effective than those delivered with reprimands or harsh words. She had watched the young man absorb these lessons, and she felt confident that the impact would be long-lasting. Kate, who had remained near Anne throughout the afternoon, offered her own quiet support. She understood the importance of balancing authority with reassurance, ensuring that the young man felt guided rather than criticized. Her gentle presence had provided comfort, reinforcing the silent lessons of the afternoon. Through small gestures, a nod, a smile, a slight shift in posture, Kate had communicated trust and encouragement, reminding him that growth could occur in a supportive environment. Together, Anne and Kate had demonstrated a model of leadership that was composed, empathetic, and quietly powerful. The royal guard, stationed discreetly nearby, continued to watch. He had witnessed the young man's transformation firsthand, from impulsive curiosity to thoughtful awareness. For the guard, this was a reminder of the subtle power of observation and patience. Authority did not always need to be loud or forceful. Sometimes, the mere presence of composed, attentive individuals was enough to guide behavior. He noted the calm confidence the young man now exhibited, understanding that such lessons would influence future interactions and help maintain the decorum of the household. As the young man moved through the room, he reflected on how every interaction earlier in the afternoon had shaped his understanding. He remembered the soft guidance of Princess Anne, the reassuring presence of Kate, and the watchful vigilance of the guard. Each of these elements had contributed to a lesson that went beyond etiquette or protocol. He had learned about respect, mindfulness, and the importance of observing the world around him before acting. In a space where history, tradition, and family hierarchy intersected, these lessons were invaluable. The atmosphere in the room was calm and composed, the earlier tension now completely dissipated. Guests continued to converse politely, though the earlier lesson had left a quiet impression on all who were present. Even those who had not been directly involved in the incident had sensed the subtle shift in the energy of the room. The young man now moved with care, speaking thoughtfully, listening attentively, and observing the unspoken rules of engagement. Every gesture he made reflected the understanding he had gained. As he approached a small side table to pour himself a cup of tea, he noticed how carefully the staff moved, their gestures precise, and their expressions attentive. He realized that the standards of respect and awareness applied to everyone within the household, not just family members. The lesson was broader than he had initially thought. It extended to interactions with everyone, from household staff to fellow guests. Awareness, humility, and consideration were essential qualities in a place defined by tradition and ceremony. Princess Anne observed him quietly, noting the changes in his demeanor. She saw that he was no longer uncertain or distracted. Instead, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his movements deliberate and respectful. The subtle guidance she had offered earlier had worked. She knew that he had absorbed the lesson and that the awareness he had gained would guide him in future interactions. Kate, too, noticed the change. Her quiet smile conveyed reassurance, acknowledging the young man's progress without drawing attention to the lesson itself. The royal guard continued to monitor the room, noting how seamlessly the young man now navigated the gathering. Every gesture was appropriate, every word measured, and every interaction carried a sense of respect and composure. For the guard, this was a success, a demonstration of how presence, observation, and patience could shape behavior without the need for confrontation. The young man's transformation reflected the effectiveness of quiet guidance, subtle correction, and empathetic leadership. As the afternoon slowly came to an end, the young man found himself reflecting on the events of the day. He understood that boundaries were not limitations, but protections, markers that ensured respect and harmony. He recognized the value of observation, the power of composed authority, and the importance of empathy in guiding behavior. The lessons of the afternoon had been learned quietly, subtly, and effectively, leaving a lasting impression that would influence him long after the gathering ended. Princess Anne and Kate shared a brief, meaningful glance. No words were necessary. Their mutual understanding was clear. They had guided the young man successfully, maintained the decorum of the household, and demonstrated the power of composed authority and empathy. Their coordinated presence had shown that leadership could be effective without harshness, that correction could occur without embarrassment, and that lessons learned through observation were often the most enduring. The young man approached Princess Anne and Kate to offer his thanks. His voice was calm and respectful, carrying sincerity and humility. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing me the importance of being aware and respectful. I understand now how much it matters to observe and learn." Anne's expression remained calm, yet there was a subtle warmth in her eyes, acknowledging the sincerity of his words. Kate offered a gentle nod, her smile reassuring and encouraging. These small gestures reinforced the young man's understanding and left him with a sense of accomplishment and gratitude. The royal guard, standing at attention nearby, observed the interaction with satisfaction. The situation had been resolved without tension, embarrassment, or conflict. The young man had learned valuable lessons. Princess Anne and Kate had maintained their authority and composure, and the harmony of the gathering had been preserved. For the guard, it was a reminder that subtlety, patience, and observation were often the most effective tools in maintaining order and teaching respect. As the guests began to depart, the young man walked through the halls with newfound confidence. He felt a sense of maturity, understanding, and responsibility that had been absent at the start of the afternoon. The lessons he had learned about boundaries, observation, respect, and empathy would guide his future interactions. He realized that being part of the royal family was not simply about privilege or position, but about understanding the responsibilities and expectations that came with it. The residence, once filled with tension and subtle unease, now radiated calm and balance. The afternoon had been a quiet success, a demonstration of the power of composed guidance, empathetic leadership, and silent correction. Every element had worked together to teach lessons that would endure far beyond the walls of the room. Princess Anne's vigilance, Kate's quiet support, and the guard's careful observation had created an environment where growth, reflection, and understanding could flourish. The young man took one last look around the room before leaving. He saw the careful arrangement of furniture, the elegant decorations, and the serene atmosphere, all of which now felt like a backdrop to a personal lesson he had learned. He felt gratitude not only for the guidance he had received, but also for the opportunity to reflect and grow in such an environment. It was a moment that would stay with him, shaping his actions, decisions, and behavior in the years to come. Princess Anne and Kate remained standing, watching the young man depart. Their expressions conveyed quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that the afternoon had achieved what it needed to without drama, confrontation, or undue attention. The royal guard, ever watchful, ensured that the departure was smooth and respectful, completing his silent role in the successful unfolding of events. The room, now empty of most guests, retained a sense of calm, composure, and accomplishment, a reflection of the lessons learned and the balance maintained. As the evening light deepened and the residence settled into quiet, the young man carried the lessons of the afternoon with him. He understood the value of presence, observation, and patience. He recognized the importance of boundaries, respect, and empathy. And he realized that true growth often comes quietly, through experience, reflection, and subtle guidance rather than instruction or correction alone. The afternoon, now fully concluded, had become a defining moment in his understanding of life within the royal household. It had shown him that authority and guidance could coexist with warmth and empathy, that lessons could be learned without embarrassment or confrontation, and that respect and awareness were essential for maintaining harmony. Princess Anne, Kate, and the royal guard had orchestrated a quiet but powerful teaching moment, leaving a lasting impact that would guide the young man in his future interactions. In the end, the day was remembered not for drama or scandal, but for growth, understanding, and the quiet exercise of authority. Every gesture, glance, and posture had played a role in shaping the outcome. The young man left with a sense of humility and awareness, carrying the lessons he had absorbed into the wider world of his life and responsibilities. It was a story of reflection, guidance, and composed leadership, a reminder that even in the most formal settings, empathy, observation, and quiet authority could shape behavior and create lasting impact.